Welcome to the Comedy Film Funnel. This is episode number 7, and the movie we will be discussing today is 1979's Being There. My name is Susan Tekla Kriglenska. It's not a great name, not at all. But my co-host, as you know, has a really excellent name, and his name is, what is your name again?
Oh, hello. I'm your co-host.
What is it? I can't recall.
Oh, the name.
Your name.
I'm a cartoonist, author.
And do you have a moniker?
I keep messing that up. Yes, I'm Joe Dater, the cartoonist and dater.
That's right. Is that the tip of my tongue?
I always get it wrong. Sorry.
So we're strangely doing a movie from the same year as the last episode, which I was kind of trying to jump around in time, but we couldn't resist doing this. It's a different comedy than anything we've done so far. This is a really dry satire, but boy, what a masterpiece it is. And it's Peter Sellers. You know, we've been doing a lot of comedy personalities that mean a lot to Joe. We've really started the year off doing a lot of that, which I think is kind of what inspired me to want to do this podcast in videocast in the first place. So I know, Joe, Peter Sellers is very special to you.
Yeah, I'm a huge Peter Sellers fan. Have been since I was a child, of course, when I first saw the Pink Panther films. And then, of course, later in life, I learned more about Peter Sellers, which was a huge mistake. You should not know anything about Peter Sellers if you want to be his fan, because he was basically a madman. But his work has not diminished in my eyes. He is still, I think, one of the most incredibly gifted comic actors of all time. And this, of course, is one of my favorite films of his. And I would dare say it's one of the few really great films he's ever been in. He worked a lot. And if you look at his filmography, many of the films he was in were crap. And quite a large number of them were never even released, never even escaped out there.
He's been quoted as saying the only 2 films he was truly proud of was this and Dr. Strangelove.
And I think he had more than that to be proud of, but
he did. He had more than that, but
pinnacle.
Those are the pinnacle. If he did nothing else but those 2 movies, of course. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Being There. And then we are going to, I'm sorry to say, we are going to talk about Peter Sellers' life.
We are going to talk about the man. Peter Sellers, the man.
We're going to go through his life a little bit and talk about who he was and his career. So yeah, we're going to do that. We'll have chapter headings, as we've always been doing in the videos. You can skip that part if you want to preserve your
image of Peter Sellers as a great,
human
wonderful guy. Being There is an interesting movie because in some ways it's timeless, like a fable, but also it is incredibly rooted in the time when it takes place, the late 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically the 70s, because of all the things that Chance is watching on television in the movie. So there's very specific cultural references to the date and to the era, and yet at the same time, it feels timeless. You're brought into this large mansion, which is like a palace, which feels timeless. It feels like a place that could exist in the 1920s or 30s. And of course, Chance is wearing these clothes that we find out are from the 1920s. Mm-hmm. They are suits that have been handed down to him from the 1920s. And the whole thing has a fairy tale quality to it.
Just as a quick background, this is based on a novel. And I read the novel. It's really a novella. It's very short. It'll take you in one sitting. Have you read it?
A long time ago.
Yeah, it's really, really quick. Now, it's interesting. So it's written by Jerzy Kosinski, who's a really interesting character. He was really in with Roman Polanski. And one of the most famous things about him is he was supposed to be at the Tate residence, at the Polanski Tate residence when the murders happened. Now, this is a little debatable. Roman in his book said that wasn't really true, but a few people have confirmed that they think that was true, that they were expecting him and that he had a luggage mix-up and that's why he wasn't there. And he was really good friends with Frykowski and Abigail Folger. But what's really interesting about Kosinski, which I think is a theme that's going to be repeated throughout this episode, is Kosinski is a really interesting blank kind of character. So he grew up in Poland, same time as Polanski. Kosinski and Polanski went to the same film school at the same time. They were classmates in film school. He went on to immigrate to America and became a quite famous writer. He wrote The Painted Bird, which is possibly his most famous book and very controversial. It recently was made into a film. It's about the Holocaust. It's about a child who went through absolute abject hell as a Jewish child living in Nazi Germany, and he was accused of plagiarism. There's a pattern with this guy. Being There itself is possibly a work of plagiarism. So the book that is supposedly the basis of Being There is The Career of Nicodemus Disma. Nicodemus Disma. That was written by, and I'm going to massacre this name, Tadeusz Dolega Mostowicz. He is Polish, and it was written in.
Call yourself a Pole?
I know, I'm the worst.
The hell?
I'm the worst Polak that ever lived. It was written in 1932, and it is, a similarly themed story. And a lot of people recognized that in Being There. And just to throw in a few other little things, he claimed to have gotten a doctorate from Columbia University shortly after arriving in America. That turns out to have been false. And there's a lot of other stuff like that. Basically, what some people have come to the conclusion of, and the Village Voice in 1982 had a whole article on this, was that he was really, really full of it. There's so much inconsistency in each of his works. They're all so completely different that they seem to have been written by different people, and that he's not giving people credit. He didn't speak English well enough to have possibly really have written all of this stuff so quickly after coming to the United States, blah, blah, blah. It's interesting because he is, in a way, an interesting cipher who kind of fell upward. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, I heard he speaks 8 languages, and on top of everything else, holds a degree in medicine as well as law. Isn't that true, Eve?
Well, I don't know, Senator, but it wouldn't surprise me.
And I'll just say, as far as Being There, the novella, I thought it started well. I didn't think it was an amazing book. I think the film is far, far better than the written word. Far
I think
better.
So yeah, I think
Yeah.
I read the book years ago, and I remember thinking that the film was richer and deeper, and I think you can give a lot of that credit to Peter Sellers' performance.
Yeah,
I think
and
it's-
Hal Ashby.
and
for
Hal
sure.
Ashby's
Yeah.
direction. It really is a layered story, and I think in the book it's a much more simple story.
Right. And we should say
yeah.
that Kosinski wrote the screenplay.
Well, there was also Robert Jones who rewrote the
And-
screenplay.
right, and-
I don't think Jerzy Kosinski knew how to write a screenplay, because apparently they said it was unreadable. It was
That's the thing.
unfilmable the way
Yeah.
he wrote it,
Right.
So that contributes to the possibility that maybe he just couldn't write it all.
Yeah, that's kind of
yeah.
the theme. That's kind of the theme. I don't like sandbagging people, but I just think it's interesting, if all of that is true, and there's a lot of people who argue that, then it is just interesting that he wrote the story. It's a parallel to himself, in a way. Of course, this character is much more innocent.
But I want to defend the book Being There more than I want to defend Kosinski,
Okay.
because if you read the Polish, the rise and rise of whatever his name is, you wouldn't get the same experience from it, and you wouldn't get the same ideas out of it that you would from reading Being There or watching the film.
Yeah.
So by that measure, it is a different work of art.
No, I agree. Now it's funny that you said the rise and rise, because I was just going to bring up that it's similar, but a sort of a mirror image of it is the rise and rise of Michael Rimmer.
If it's similar to anything, it's similar to the rise and rise of Michael Rimmer, the Peter Cook film. Yeah, maybe they plagiarized.
Yeah.
My point is that kind of a plot of someone, an unlikely guy rising to the top, is not. It's not a completely original plot.
Right. Yeah, no, I was thinking back to Candide. I had to read in high school Candide in French, which is about a foolish man. He doesn't really rise to power, but he kind of goes through life being an idiot. And one of the themes of that, and the conclusion of it, is the line, "We all must cultivate our garden." I think I'm getting that quote right. It's about gardening. So I thought, well, that has to have been a little bit of a contributor to this concept. And then, of course, you look at Barry Lyndon, is another idiot rising to the top.
Yeah, through treachery,
Steve Martin's The Jerk, is kind of that kind of thing. I was trying to think of all the films I could think of where idiots who just or Forrest Gump, is kind of that way. Although I don't even know if I've seen Forrest Gump. It's so funny. I don't think
I have seen Forrest Gump many times. And at the time I remember people saying to me, well, this movie sucks. Why? Because Being There is better, which to me is a terrible review of a movie. You don't review a movie by saying it sucks because another movie like it is better. But it definitely has a similar sort of a plot structure to Being There. There's a simpleton who might be mentally disabled, who eventually becomes famous. But it's a completely different movie about a completely different thing,
No, like
and
you said, it's something that is, you can always write about the rise to power, and you can either write it as a evil person rising to power, or this is like, Idiocracy has a little bit of this in it, where it's like, the
right, yeah,
stupidest rises to power.
yeah,
And it is,
Average Joe.
yeah, it's you can't fault someone for rewriting that story in their own unique way and in their own time, right?
If Jerzy Kosinski is controversial in any way to me, it is largely because one time on the Letterman show, he told the other guest, Jerry Garcia, that he likes to write to the Grateful Dead music. And I don't know
See?
if I can ever forgive him for that.
And there's no way someone's gonna write like this listening to the Grateful Dead. I'm sorry. No, it's not. That just proves it. That proves it. He didn't write this
You
stuff.
think that
There's
that
no way. There's no
solidifies?
way.
There's no way you can put on
Solidify.
a 12-hour jam by the Grateful Dead
No,
and write a
and
great
write
book.
this
It just
and
can't
write
happen.
this.
It just
No,
can't
no,
happen.
no. So Peter Sellers read the book and had been thinking for a long time, that he wanted to do this. He was having trouble getting it together because at that point in his career, when he had read the book, his career was kind of floundering a bit. It was one of his low periods. So he contacted Kosinski, and he was kind of romancing Kosinski. He wanted Kosinski to choose him to be the person to star in this movie. It started in 1971 when I was in London. He left a message. This is Kosinski speaking. He left a message saying, "C. Gardner had called. It turned out to be Peter Sellers. For 7.5 years, he sent cables and left baffling messages on my answering machine. Gradually, we became friends, and whenever we met, we would do a Chauncey Gardner act. I gave in finally." And he would literally send telegrams saying, "I love you," like 3 telegrams. "I love you." I mean, he was really like all over this guy.
Yeah, and Sellers thought he was this character. He
Yeah.
saw himself in this character, which I find incredibly interesting because it's not a flattering thing to see yourself in this character, really. And Peter Sellers was a guy who was not known for having a lot of self-awareness. He was kind of narcissistic and somewhat delusional about himself, and he was known for being very childish and throwing temper tantrums and having an inflated image of his own greatness and being very temperamental. By all accounts, he was a kind of empty guy. He was a person where there was no there. Underneath all the characters, he was just a very sad, depressed, kind of empty guy. And so the fact that he saw that he was this character is very interesting to me, that it was some part of him that understood all of his own flaws.
Yeah. And he said that out loud. He would tell people that, and not just about this movie, which he also said he saw himself in this character,
Yeah.
but in general, he would joke around and say, "There is no me." Like, there's
But
no
people
me.
who, yeah, and that was a joke he'd say, "I have no true self. I'd had it surgically removed." He said that on the Muppet Show.
This movie, the director is Hal Ashby. And just as another foreshadowing, it's interesting that he fell in love with Harold and Maude. He saw that movie and thought, all right, this is the director I want. And he just fell in love with that movie. But it's interesting because it's an older woman and a very young guy. So we will be talking, when we talk about his life story, that he, a lot of people felt he was way too close with his mother. And that was part of his torment, kind of, his inner torment was that he was one of those people who had a overly suffocating and very controlled relationship with his mother, to the point that it really kind of wrecked him. And so it's sort of interesting that he really was very attracted to the Harold and Maude story.
His mother was Peg, and he had this incredible closeness with her up until and well after her death. He used to say he spoke to her. Years after she was dead, he used to say, "Oh yeah, I spoke to my mother last night, and she thought this was a good idea, or that was a good idea, or something like that." And he would say that to people he was working with, and they would just walk away going, "Okay, pretty sure his mother's been dead for a decade, but that's okay." And he would just say it matter of factly, "Oh yes, I spoke to my mother last night. It was fine."
Yeah.
He was a bit out there. Peter Sellers, I don't know if people know this, but he died in 1964. He had a heart attack in Los Angeles and was dead on the table for several minutes and was revived. And there's a marked difference in the person he was before that event and the person he was after that. Because the person he was before that was much easier to work with and was somewhat sensible. The person he was after that was incredibly difficult to work with, and would throw temper tantrums and believed in superstitions and was consulting his psychic every day for advice, and was speaking to his dead mother, as I said. And it's very, very possible that while he was dead on the slab in 1964, that he suffered some kind of brain damage, because he was not the same person after that. He was way, way nuttier.
Yeah, I think that's very plausible and very, very sad. So the other thing that is important to know about this movie is this came out pretty shortly before Peter Sellers' death. He died shortly after this came out. There was one other movie right after it, but
Yes, and
many think of this as basically his final movie. So let's talk about this movie. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm
Let's-
ready.
Okay.
I'm very ready.
That's a nice car. Do you drive it, Mr. Chance?
I've never been in an automobile.
You've never been in a car?
No. I've never been allowed outside of the house.
What would you describe it as? We are the comedy film funnel, and would you describe it as a comedy or a funnel?
Is this comedy? It's a satire, and it does have a lightness to it.
Yeah.
I think it's a very dry satire. It's like Network, that you'd almost miss that it's a comedy, but of course it is.
At the center of it is Peter Sellers doing this comedy performance that is almost from the silent era.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
he's sort of channeling Stan Laurel in a lot of the vocal tics and mannerisms, and the voice he chose, and that was a conscious choice. He had to base it somewhat on Stan Laurel. He's not just doing Stan Laurel, he's creating a new character which is reminiscent of Stan Laurel.
I've never been in one of these before.
Suppose we share the same beer, then we won't spend so much money.
He was very fat, had short hair, and showed me pictures from a funny little book.
Well, I was afraid if I took the oath to go to the convention, that maybe my wife wouldn't let me go.
We are not so far from each other. Our chairs are almost touching.
You're perspiring. Maybe you have got a fever.
Because Chance is so simple and straightforward and childlike, he says things in this very direct way. So somebody says, like, well, would you like me to bring you a drink, sir? And he says, that's a good idea. But that's exactly a thing Stan Laurel used to say.
With that
The
little
same
lilting,
inflection, yeah.
with the lilting inflection. Yeah,
Yeah.
that little inflection. And we'll see in his career, slapstick and silent movie themes are part of his whole inheritance, like what he was drawing from. He was drawing from that from the beginning.
And what it put me in the mind of when I was rewatching the film and I started thinking about that was Samuel Beckett. It put me in the mind of the way Samuel Beckett idolized Laurel and Hardy, and he idolized Buster Keaton, and then used those sort of characters as the basis for the characters in Waiting for Godot.
Mhm.
And eventually, of course, Samuel Beckett made films with Buster Keaton.
So it's about a man who is a gardener for a very rich man, and all we know is he calls him the old man. That's all we know. We never learn his name.
Jennings. We find out later Jennings.
Oh,
The
wait,
lawyer
do
is
we?
talking about him. and says
Oh,
Jennings.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I guess they do. And so the old man dies, and you realize that he had been living there since childhood, acting as this man's gardener for no pay. This was just, he was fed. So there's this housekeeper named Louise who feeds him and who befriends him, and kind of, you get the impression kind of raised him.
Good morning, Louise.
He's dead, Chance. The old man's dead.
I see.
He wasn't breathing, and as cold as a fish.
In the book, she had already gotten sick, and she sadly had died. She went back to Jamaica and died. So when the old man dies, there's a new woman housekeeper who Chance, the protagonist's name is Chance. He doesn't like her. So it's a little bit different in the book. And you also learn a little bit about his background in that his mother died at birth. So somehow this man took him in. So I think what's implied is that this is his father, right? Should we be assuming that?
My theory about Chance's backstory is based solely on the movie, not the book, is that he is the old man's illegitimate son.
Right.
And that the old man, we see later, the old man lives in this beautiful house, but that house is in the middle of inner city Washington, D.C. And we're meant to believe that this old man had been very wealthy and powerful. My theory is that he had an illegitimate son, maybe with another maid, an earlier maid, and just used his money and power to cover up the pregnancy, make the mother disappear somehow, maybe by nefarious ways, but then didn't have the heart to just give away the child. So took the boy in, never said where he came from. The boy never had a social security number or any kind of documentation, and just raised the boy in the house. And Louise, the maid in the movie, came on later, so she did not know his origin or where he came from.
It's great that they really don't go anywhere near
No,
implying that or hitting it
no. He
hard
could
at
have
all.
come from
You
outer
just,
space
you
in
just
the
have no
movie,
idea.
but-
Yeah. And I think that it's significant that he's male. I have a feeling that, he was maybe thinking, oh, well, I'll have a son and he'll, be an inheritor. But then it turned out that Chance does seem to have developmental difficulties. So, that's what I would imagine. That's in my head, what happened was he then realized as he was growing up, oh, this kid is never going to be my real son. And so, he turns him into a servant. And
I don't even know if I'd go that far. I would say
Yeah.
possibly from birth he was chosen to be the redheaded cousin, as they say, just
Yeah,
locked
who
locked
knows?
in the attic, or maybe he was diagnosed as having a birth defect of some
Mhm.
kind. And so they said, well, we can never let him out of this house. No one can ever see that this is my son.
But it is strange that he didn't just give him away, that he didn't just put him in an orphanage.
Well, maybe
So,
he didn't have the heart. Maybe he just didn't have the heart to do it.
well,
I
he
don't
doesn't
know.
seem to have a heart. He doesn't seem to have a heart.
Well, that's true.
I mean, so he ended up using him. He was
We
a
don't know.
completely 100% neglectful father who never taught him anything. This kid didn't know how to read, doesn't know how to, as an adult, he doesn't know how to read, he doesn't know how to write. And he was utterly, utterly neglected. He was basically fed by the housekeeper, and it's the only person he socialized with. He literally remembers like the one time a maintenance guy came and chatted with him,
Which
because that's
suggests
how
autism, which remembers this tiny little detail from 20 years earlier.
he just was completely and utterly ignored by this old man and put in front of a TV, of course.
By the way, this is 1,000 times better performance and portrayal of this type of person than Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. And it's one more reason why Peter Sellers should be very, very upset at Dustin Hoffman.
Right. So Peter Sellers was nominated for an Oscar for this role, and he lost to Dustin Hoffman, which is
for Kramer versus Kramer. And I don't know if I've mentioned this in the show, but I freaking hate Dustin Hoffman. He's the worst actor. He's terrible. If you want to watch this movie and then watch Rain Man right after this, you're going to see one great performance and one horrible performance. One performance where you believe he's this person, and another performance where you see the actor with a capital A doing his thespian thing and acting and working hard to earn an Oscar, which she sadly did again.
I'm not a huge Dustin Hoffman fan, but I got to say, I do think Rain Man is a portrayal of severe autism that's pretty amazing. But that's me, so I'm sorry, I disagree. But
I don't know, but Peter Sellers deserved the Oscar for this.
I agree.
Especially since it's never made clear that he's mentally disabled in the film. Much like his origin, it's left vague. It's left, out there.
It could be just neglect. It could be pure neglect. Yeah.
So much like, Robert Downey Jr. says in Tropic Thunder, he doesn't go the full R word.
Oh,
and you never go the full R word.
But
that should have ensured him the Oscar.
I thought we'd never bring up Tropic Thunder on the show, but there you go.
Well, he gives. I'm sorry, but it's relevant because in that movie, he gives examples of who gets the Oscar and who doesn't.
It's a truism.
Sean Penn in I Am Sam, full R word, doesn't get the Oscar.
All right. So we should also say that Melvin Douglas won the Oscar, and he well deserved.
Yeah.
For his role as Ben in this movie. So what happens is the old man dies, the house is shut down. In this movie, Louise packs it up and gets out and says to him, go find yourself a woman. You got to do something with your life. You can kind of tell in her conversation that she's very worried about him. So he's
not worried enough. Just say to him, okay, goodbye. That's not
well. I mean, there's not a lot she has. She doesn't have any resources. She has no money. She has no. She can't take care of him. She ends up in this movie. Now in the book, they don't really
in a sort of welfare hotel or something.
Right, and it's not in the book. They don't have that in the book because she dies in the book. But in the movie, she ends up in like basically what looks like a group home. Not like she could take care of him. So anyway. He goes off because the lawyers kick him out. He has no claim to anything because he doesn't know he's really this guy's son, which he probably is. In the book, he's in New York City, by the way, but in the movie, he's in Washington, D.C. So you see him walking, and it's really beautiful. They start playing.
Thus spake Zarathustra, but it's the Deodato's disco version of it.
It's a disco version. It
Which
starts
is-
out very dramatic
yeah.
and then it goes disco, and it's but it works. It somehow that totally works.
It's so brilliantly done, because when Chance walks out of this beautiful home that he's lived in, you also are seeing the outside of it for the first time with him. So there's no point at which you know that this home is in the middle of inner city Washington, D.C., in what is now a slum area. And it's all done to the sound of a disco version of the same music that was used to represent human discovery in Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right.
And it's obviously a clear reference to that film, because later on we see Chance goes to a store where there's TV cameras in the window, and there's images of the moon and Earth from space in that window.
It's the moon's surface, and you see Earth as in space. So it's just a 100% reference, to Kubrick. It's great.
Yeah. And the music is still playing. This is a long piece. I have it on my phone and I listen to it sometimes. And it's like a 7-minute piece, and almost the entire piece plays out over this long sequence of the film of Chance walking through the streets of Washington, D.C., discovering the outside world for the first time in his life.
There's this gorgeous shot where he's so unused to how things work. He's walking up the median in the middle of a 4-lane highway. It's really beautifully shot because it's at dusk, and he's just walking
And the camera tilts up.
lanes and lanes of cars are going past in both directions all around him.
Camera's tilting up to reveal what will ultimately be his destiny. It's the Capitol building.
Now, not in the book is this entire extra layer that has to do with the issue of race and racism. And that's not in the book at all. Like I don't believe there's a drop of it really in the book. And so they add this whole layer. And so you see him walking past like a girly theater. I mean, there's like this white barker trying to get him to come in. And this woman who kind of resembles Louise, who is a black woman,
an older black woman. That's his source of food.
Yeah. And he stops her and he says, "Excuse me, but I'm hungry. Can you give me lunch?" And that's obviously like, he just doesn't, he recognizes her as, this is like Louise, and maybe she'll feed me. Yeah.
Older black woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's that moment where he walks past a wall that's graffitied, and the graffiti says, "America ain't shit because the white man's got a God complex."
Yeah.
And I wonder if that was there anyway, or if they put that there for the film.
I think
either way, it would make sense.
I think they put that there. And so then eventually he comes upon a gang of kids, and he says something like, "Excuse me, but where can I find a garden to tend?"
Could you please tell me where I can find a garden to work in?
A garden? You're growing tomatoes.
There is much to be done during the winter. I should start the seeds for the spring and work the soil.
Bullshit. Who sent you here, boy? Did that chicken shit asshole Raphael send you, boy?
And so they get very threatening with him. They assume he's like some messenger from another gang. It's really strange. My favorite moment in that is that one of the kids, as he approaches him, goes like this. Like, so I'm making
I didn't notice that.
I'm making the finger symbol of square, which you see in cartoons, like people in the 70s, we use a square. And I thought nobody really does that, but they really do that in this movie. Like he's indicating that he's a square.
What I find interesting about the Raphael scene is how it doesn't escalate. Like, it could escalate into violence if Chance was a different person. If Chance was the kind of person who, when they get in his face, he would get in their face. But he's not. He's a completely benign presence. Because he's such a completely benign presence, they pull a knife on him, but then retract the knife. Because he clearly poses no threat to them. He pulls out his remote control.
Yeah, he pulls out his remote control.
Makes them laugh, kind of.
Yeah.
And they think it's silly. But they also see there's something about him that tells them that he's not a threat to them.
I mean, they're hostile. I mean, they kind of harass him as he's leaving. They're definitely hostile. They're like picking at his jacket, and they're kind of harassing him. It's really interesting because it's a clashing of cultures. So they're like, they've never seen anybody like him. The only way they're interpreting him is like, you must be a messenger, another gang,
rival
person.
Gang, yeah.
And it's so funny that they would put that on him. So they said, give Raphael this message from us. And they're pretty serious about it. They seem pretty serious about it.
But he complies politely.
Yeah.
That, I think the fact that he politely complies is significant there.
Right.
It's significant of who he is as a person. And it's perfectly within his character. He's
just the center of sort of peacefulness and calmness and like, what's the word? Zen. I mean, he's Zen, in the way. So what happens is he ends up getting hit by a car, and basically his leg is crushed between two cars by a limo backing up, and they crush his leg, and out comes
Shirley MacLaine.
Shirley MacLaine in head to toe furs, rich, super rich Shirley MacLaine.
It's pretty obvious that she's a very wealthy woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
There's a driver and a butler. Yeah.
They decide to take him in, and she happens to have all these doctors at her house anyway because her husband's dying. And so she says, well, why don't you just come? And, probably they want to avoid insurance and a lawsuit. They want to have him under their control so that he won't sue them, that kind of thing. And so I think it's a little bit of a manipulation on her part at this point, in the story.
Sure.
So she takes him back, and he's more than happy to be taken in. It turns out it's another gargantuan mansion, and it's the home of Melvin Douglas's character, which is
Benjamin Rand.
Benjamin Rand. And I believe he's based on Baruch, the rich New Yorker. I'm forgetting his first name, but which Baruch College was named after.
I suppose we never really find out what he does or who he is. I mean, apparently he's the head of this firm, this financial firm. We just know that he's incredibly wealthy and powerful. He is the top 1% of the 1%,
right?
And that he's very, very close with politicians and has this massive influence. Is basically the halls of power he resides in.
So now let's just say, as they're pulling in, so she's sort of getting to know him in the car as they're driving. Of course, there's a TV. So let me say, one of the reasons this movie is so much better than the book is you have to have these TV clips going. It adds so much to this movie.
It's often the soundtrack of the movie.
Yeah.
Instead of music, what you're hearing in the background are the TV clips, and the TV clips seem to, but don't really comment on what's going on.
They do. They kind of, and they're beautifully, they're beautifully curated. So for example, so at the beginning of the movie, when Louise is telling him that the old man died, they're playing a Sesame Street clip with Buffy St. Marie. Buffy St. Marie.
Bird, yeah.
It's a beautiful song. It's this beautiful little piece, and it just adds this real magical element.
Yeah.
And he often has like Mr. Rogers on in Sesame Street, or some kind of children's thing, or aerobics, these very simple, like kind of dead brain kind of stuff, things that you just can stare at for hours.
Some of the clips that show up are Sesame Street, Captain Kangaroo, Get Smart's in
there,
the Hollywood Squares, The Price is Right,
Paul Lynde, you see,
the Beverly Hillbillies. And sometimes the clips are, as you say, they're perfectly underscoring the emotion of the scene, as with that Big Bird scene when he's learning of the old man dying. But then later he goes up to see the old man's body laying there under a sheet. And of course he puts on the TV in the room.
Feeling so good it shows.
And the TV is playing the Sealy Posturepedic commercial with the jingle.
So it's like this crazy contrast,
commenting on irony. So in the scene where they're pulling into this giant mansion,
that's what I wanted to talk about.
What I love about that scene is they're sitting there and he's getting to know, and any normal person would just talk to the other person. He puts on the TV and turns it to the most garish thing he can find. But of course, he watches whatever's on. He doesn't really seem to choose too much.
And he finds comfort. We should say he finds extreme comfort in the TV. This was his parent. This was this was his lifelong companion.
Yeah. So he turns on what was a thing in the late 1970s was the Sha Na Na show. And then it goes into a video clip, an animated film that was done to accompany the song Basketball Jones.
Yeah, and that's what really it kills me.
Yeah.
So it's really beautiful, and but it's ugly and beautiful. It's abrasive and beautiful. It's shocking in a way, and so it has the kind of cartoon style of Schoolhouse Rock, which I'm sure most people kind of remember. You can find this on YouTube, and it was Cheech Marin doing a sort of a novelty song about a young black kid named Basketball Jones. Now, the cartoon is really, really caricature in a way that nobody would ever do now. It's quite the depiction of black people is very offensive, in exaggerate, the way it's exaggerated. It's like way over the top. The song is very interestingly bittersweet song. It's about this poor kid, has very poignant lyrics, really.
No, he's very short. He's dreaming of being a great basketball star.
Yeah, and he's like sort of pleading to people around him about wanting to do this. And you
there's a
see people
sadness to it.
reacting to it. And the song itself has this minor key bittersweetness to it. And I don't know, it really gets to me that that's what he's listening to as he's pulling into this house.
The aspirational nature of it becomes the perfect underscore as the camera is revealing this enormous mansion, and Chance is being brought into, once again, as I mentioned, his destiny.
Sleep at night. I need help, ladies and gentlemen. I need someone to stand beside me. I'm basketball Joe. I got a basketball Joe. Oh, that sounds so sweet. I got a basketball Joe.
But it's just an extraordinary sequence, the juxtaposition of the image of the cars pulling into this mansion through the gates, past the trees, and up to the property.
It's at night and it's rained. And so you have these beautiful color reflections and the gate is gorgeous. It's just, again, Hal Ashby, man, cinematography is Caleb Deschanel.
Right. Well, I have an interesting bit of trivia about the Basketball Jones clip cartoon that is used in this scene, which is, it was made in 1972 and it was released in theaters as a short before showings of The Last Detail.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting. Right. So Hal Ashby, we didn't really summarize Hal Ashby. Let's just say really quickly, Hal Ashby, of course, did The Last Detail. He did Shampoo, which is such a great movie. And he was an editor for Norman Jewison. So he edited The Russians Are Coming, which was Alan Arkin's first film. Of course, he did Coming Home, The Last Detail, Harold and Maude, Shampoo, Bound for Glory. And, he's just, there's so much that's obviously him. And we didn't even talk about the opening of this movie, how beautiful the absolute opening is when Chance is just waking up and the orchestra's playing on the television. And it's just magnificently done. So now we meet Ben and you see Eve and Ben together. And I like the choice that, so she's much younger than him, and they talk about that. She says that right in the car when they're driving over. Oh, he's way older than me. But you really feel like they love each other. I like the choice that they didn't make it into, what's interesting about this movie is you would think they would really make Ben into a sort of negative character,
that would be so easy, right?
That would be so easy to make him a evil corporate head of corporation. And they don't, and they make the feeling of the love between Eve and Ben very genuine, and you feel it, and despite their age difference, and that she has a little bit of a floozy look, it was just like right on the edge, tipping in either direction, but you really feel like they're good people that ultimately, yes, there's a villain role for them in that they're the part of America that doesn't understand how good they have it. And that is taking advantage of the rest of the world.
They're deeply ensconced in the halls of power.
Right.
So there's almost no way anything they do does not have some sort of negative effect.
Right.
There's really nothing they can do. They're just part of this power structure that is deep set in place. You're right about that. I mean, making Ben supposedly this very good-hearted man, and even when we hear him later talking about his political ambitions and the things he wants to influence, you see that he's certainly somebody who would never have any influence in politics today because he is a communist.
Yeah, you're right. But that's kind of what is a really, again, a very difficult needle to thread is the movie's making a comment on these kinds of people. It's a very negative comment about rich people and about white people. Even white privilege is part of this, especially just in the movie version.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's not judging. It's really not judging these people. It's like, they are who they are, and they're actually decent human beings who are just, that's who they are.
When we meet the president of the United States later on, it's Jack Warden, and we don't find out if he's a Democrat or a Republican nowadays.
Right.
That if you made the movie now, it would have to be very clear. It would be made very clear.
Yeah,
and
isn't that
you have to
interesting?
remember, this was made during the Jimmy Carter administration, and that was a time in politics when people really did see the Republicans, the Democrats, as kind of just meh, one side, the other side, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that all changed after Reagan. that divide, but people did see it as like, well, let's see, whichever candidate gives me some better ideas, I'll vote for them. It was a very different landscape.
What's interesting about that is what happens next is Reagan gets elected. And what's funny is this almost reflects that, because, and I feel this way, and again, apologies to people who are Reagan fans, but I feel like he's a idiot who fell upward.
I don't think Reagan didn't know what he was doing at every moment.
Well, I don't know.
The difference.
I don't know.
I think Reagan was a villain. This movie makes me think about the thing that George Carlin used to say when he would talk about politics towards the end of his life. He would say, you don't have freedom of choice. You go to vote, but it's already been decided for you because you are owned. This country is owned, and it's owned by a handful of people. And this movie really shows you the halls of power.
Yeah.
It shows you the white marble columns that really rule this country. He's buried in a Masonic grave later on. We get the suggestion that he's part of this secret society of like a handful of men who meet in smoky rooms and decide the fate of the whole country.
Like I was just saying, they don't really judge him and they don't paint him as a villain until really the funeral. And then they kind of bring out the knives a little bit, because they bury him in a pyramid with a Masonic eye. And in the eulogy, we'll talk about that when we get to the end.
You can't live in a castle like he does and not be a villain. That's
right. That's the thing. That's the thing.
You can't be a billionaire and not be an exploiter and a robber baron of some kind. We have a problem in this country. And this is how we ended up with Trump. And the problem we have in this country is that people see an authoritative looking white man wearing an expensive suit, and they think he must know what he's talking about. That is the plot of this movie. Chance walks out of that house. He's a nicely groomed white man, and he is wearing these very expensive suits. And that seems to be enough. If he walked out of that house in Washington, D.C. dressed like I am now, this movie wouldn't have happened. Those suits he wears are the star of the movie.
Yeah.
Because we just have a problem with this country where if you look fairly authoritative and you speak well and you're wearing a nice suit and you're white and you have white hair, you seem like a person of some age and authority, well, you can pretty much get away with murder in this country.
Yeah, I would not compare Chance to Trump. I would compare Biden.
No, I'm not comparing Chance to Trump. I'm saying that this is the problem we have in this country.
I know,
and it's one of the ways we got Trump.
You can't. No, I don't agree with that. I think it's why we got Biden. Now I'm a Democrat, right? I voted for Biden, but I did not.
That's true too. That's also true.
All right.
It's the suits. The suits are the problem.
No, not for Trump. No, Trump, people knew he was a scumbag and they wanted a scumbag, right? Biden is more of the vacuous, like he's the blank slate. I think Biden's a blank slate.
No, I think.
And I voted for Biden, okay? But Trump, I did not want Biden. Biden was my last choice.
My point is, Trump has this same thing in that he looks like he's the boss of something.
No, he doesn't.
He's a moron, but yeah, he does. He's tall, he's white, he wears a suit, he looks like he's in charge. He looks like he's the boss of something, which means he seems to be able to go around saying absurd, stupid things, and still people go, yes, he's got a point. That man knows what he's talking about. Yes, he's got a point. And it's all about this sickness we have in this country for white men in suits.
Okay. Well, I mean, Obama won, and
that's what the movie's about. I think
Obama didn't have that much experience, and I would argue that we've gotten to the point where we will vote a black man in who also is a suit.
It was hard. My point is, it would have been easy.
Yeah.
To be a white man in a suit. It's all when Louise says, sees Chance on TV and says, all you got to be in this country is white.
Yeah, we're going to get to that.
She leaves out the part about the suit. The suit is so important, and
she leaves out the part about the being male. But
the fact that the Chance lived with this old man who gave him access to his clothes, which fit him, is so significant to this film. And
that's the entire point. That's the entire point. Is he had these amazing suits. They fit him perfectly. They say that over and over again in the book, and I think they maybe comment a couple times in the movie that they fit those suits happened to fit him perfectly. That was part of it, and that's why I think also it was his dad. That's why I think it was his dad. He happened to be the same exact size.
That's true. Yeah.
So let's just get back to the movie. What's funny is when he's being X-rayed, it's a black technician X-raying him. He says, "Oh, I have a message."
Do you know Raphael?
So they have dinner. Chance says some things about gardening that everybody interprets. So the theme of the movie is Chance speaks very simply, and he's obsessed with gardening. It's his love. It's his one and only love. Again, it's a little bit like, it does imply autism in a way of is super focused, but on the other hand, that's the only world he knew anyway. But whenever he talks about it, they think he's talking more broadly about the economy or whatever it is they're talking about at the time. So they project intelligence onto him because they all see him as a very handsome guy in a nice suit, and that he has some really biting, insightful wisdom.
I'm telling you, it's the suit.
It is. It is.
I've been thinking about starting a financial assistance fund. Tell me, Chauncey, would you have any ideas on that subject?
No, Ben.
Reluctant to speak, huh?
So they have this dinner where kind of that all gets laid down. And, Shirley MacLaine is Eve. Her name is Eve in this. She gets increasingly impressed with him. So at this point, they're calling Chance Chauncey Gardner because they misunderstood him explaining who he was.
Yeah.
And Chance is thinking, and they say this in the book, once you're given a name, like on TV, that's your name. Like once your name is stated, that's the name you have for the rest of the program. So he just accepts it as like, okay, now I'm Chauncey Gardner.
It's a plot contrivance that at the moment he says he's Chance the gardener, he's coughing and it comes out as Chauncey Gardner.
Yeah. We find out the president of the United States is really good friends with Ben. And he is coming to visit because he just wants to confer with him about the economy. And I guess also he knows he's going to die. It's pretty obvious that Ben's going to die. And you get the feeling
right. He's preparing for his death.
He wants to say, kind of do a last visit. So the president is Jack Warden. He's the only one who I think is painted as he's not good-hearted. Like you can't really put your finger on it.
No.
But
because he comes over and he's very warm with Ben and he says, good friend, and he grabs both of his hands. And then later on, when he's on Air Force One, he says something like, why can't we find anything on this Gardner guy? We got thousands of pages on Rand. That's how he's now referring to his friend as this. We got thousands of pages of background on Rand, and you think that, oh yeah, he's still the president of the United States. He's not your friend. He's not your buddy.
Yeah.
I think Jack Warden is great in this movie because if there was any question that it's a comedy, Jack Warden gives a purely comedic performance in this film. He's a blustering straight man foil for Peter Sellers's silent comedian in the scene where they meet.
Yeah.
And it's a very funny scene.
Yeah. The way he's shaking hands with him, and he doesn't know what to make of this guy. Like he's never met anybody like this.
He's Edgar Kennedy in that scene.
So, he just doesn't know how to greet the president. And, he calls him by his first name and he grabs both his hands and, he's being very gauche, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the president's totally bewildered because he's never treated this way, blah, blah, blah. But, he again pulls out the gardening metaphors, supposed metaphors. They think they're metaphors for the economy. And the president thinks it's clever enough and refreshing enough a take that he incorporates it into his next speech. And so suddenly Chauncey's in the news and he's in this speech for the president, and everybody's so taken with his whole thing is this optimism. Of course, when Chance is talking about all this stuff, he's simply talking about a garden. But they interpret it as a very optimistic, refreshingly optimistic and simple way to look at the economy. There are economists who would completely agree with it.
What makes this plot contrivance of people misunderstanding what he means or ascribing this great intellectual meaning to these banal statements that he's making is, I think, that it's all going through Melvyn Douglas first, because I think his performance is so good that you believe that he is genuinely connecting with this man, with Chance.
Yeah. Oh, I agree.
The way he responds to Peter Sellers, I think, is the heart of the movie.
Lesser actors would not have been able to pull off, again, razor's edge kind of stuff, because the dialogue's very simple. And it really takes what you feel behind the eyes when he's saying these very simple sentences, when, including Melvyn Douglas' reactions to Chance. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that if this was a pure farce satire, it wouldn't have worked. It has to have that heart at the center of it. And that heart is genuine. There's a moment that really gets me in this film when Melvyn Douglas is in the hospital bed and he's got tubes in him, and he has to be given care every day and oxygen just so he can make it to the dinner table. And Peter Sellers looks down at him and he just says this incredibly simple, straightforward statement and says, "I'm sorry you're so sick, Ben."
sorry you're so sick, Ben.
I'm sorry you're so sick, Ben.
Yeah.
He does understand that. He's seen this before with the old man he worked for. And Melvin Douglas doesn't say anything. He just takes his hand,
Mm-hmm.
And that moment has me in tears every time, because I think it's one of the only moments in the film where there's no misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Chance is saying exactly what he means. He knows what he's saying. And the person he's saying it to is receiving it exactly as he intended it. It's a moment of true communication between him and Ben. There's no metaphor. There's no farcical misunderstanding of what he means or anything like that. It's just a pure connection between these two men. And the relative intelligence of one of them is irrelevant at that moment. And it makes me cry every time I see that.
I think there's a parallel with our last episode too, the in-laws, in which you were saying at first you felt like there wasn't a character arc with Vince Ricardo, Peter Falk's character, and then you realized that there was, and because it's subtle, and I think that's the same here, where you could almost swear there's no character arc with Chance. But there is, because at first he's just simply impersonating the TV. Every reaction he's doing to people is what he's seen on TV. You actually see him in some scenes kind of rehearsing back to the TV and repeating what the TV's saying. He understands that if you repeat what somebody has said to you, that's good. They like that. They like that you're repeating what they're saying and that it's an affirmation. There's even one scene where he's practicing shaking hands with himself because he doesn't know how to do that. And he sees it on the TV. And that actually is later reflected in his learning how to kiss. They actually have that.
Right.
But, it starts with shaking hands, and it starts with just simply learning how to respond to people. And I think he realizes especially when he's getting kicked out of the house, I have to just act like this, whatever it is I'm saying, I need to learn this immediately and start doing this. And I think that that's the character arc with him, is like you said, that's a moment where he's not just repeating what he saw on TV. Maybe he learned that makes sense from TV, but he's really feeling it, And then by the end of the movie, you really see it, and we'll get to that in the death scene. So do you want to take a break and talk about Peter Sellers and then get back to the movie?
Yes.
All right. So Peter Sellers. Now, there is a lot to say about Peter Sellers. So, this is going to be a little bit of a whipping through his life. But we'll do the best we can. So I'm like kind of cosplaying. This is Pink Panther, the closest thing I have to pink jewels and a panther on my fingers. Peter Sellers was born in 1925. He's British, by the way. And his name
British
is
and Jewish.
And half Jewish. His mother is Jewish. Okay. His father was Anglican or something like that. And he was born Richard Henry Sellers. Richard Henry Sellers. Who was Peter Sellers, Joe? Who was actually Peter Sellers?
Well, he was what? Huh?
No, so Peter Sellers was his older brother. He was born stillborn. Peter Sellers was the firstborn.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, born stillborn. His mother had a child who was born stillborn named Peter, and she had a second child named Richard Henry Sellers, and they almost immediately started calling him Peter. So that right there.
Yeah, that's going to mess you up, I think, a little bit.
That could mess you up a little bit.
Yeah. From what I understand, he had a few strikes against him. One was that he was a doted on only child, which is going to mess anybody up, and that's like a machine that creates narcissists. So he had this, this overbearing, overprotective mother. Also, he was born into a showbiz family.
Yeah. So let me just read you a quote from his mother. This is a quote from his mother. "My son doesn't need to think. I do all the thinking for him." And yeah, that was the kind of thing. I think she probably said that on a pretty regular basis. I mean, I think she was being jokey. I have a feeling she was a very jokey person, but yeah, at the same time, people said they were alarmed at their relationship, people who knew them. So he was an only child. They actually put him in a very good Catholic school. So neither of the parents were Catholic, but it was just it was a good school, so they put him in there. Apparently, he says that he didn't really understand that he was Jewish till he went, the kids started calling him a Jew, and then he was like, oh, really?
One of the other things people probably who have seen his films don't really understand about him, which is maybe a clue to his personality, is that for the longest time in his younger years, he was very fat.
And tall. Yeah, he's tall.
Yeah, he was. Well, I don't think he was terribly tall.
He was
about 5'9" or so.
No, they said when he was 13, he was like
for his age. Yeah,
he was a couple inches. He was a couple inches. No, you can see it in photographs. He was a couple inches above the other kids.
He was a chubby kid, and he was sort of a big doughy kid and was very insecure about that. And it was one of the contributing factors to his lifetime of massive insecurity. The problem is his insecurity was pathological. And I've met people like this, and they are simply monsters. His insecurity was so great that it swept everything in its path.
Yeah.
And he couldn't have any kind of healthy relationship with anyone, really.
So he came from generations of entertainers. His grandfather or great grandfather was a pretty famous boxer, pugilist, 1800s. Yeah. And then he also had his grandmother was a entertainer, and then his mother was an entertainer. This is all kind of vaudeville kind of burlesque kind of stuff. And his mother's act was to stand in front of a projector.
Right, with white leotard,
and they would project different
costumes of she would pose, and they would project Cleopatra onto her, and then
costumes
she
through
would
history
pose differently, and they would project Marie Antoinette onto her, and that was the whole act.
Yeah. So if you watch the HBO biopic, The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, there's this really odd sort of almost dream sequence where they show his mother in a white leotard, and that's happening, and you don't really understand it when you're seeing it, but then when if you look at the bios of her,
that was a real act in those days. It was very much sort of like old English music hall type stuff, and that was something he was always connected to, that sort of old English music hall tradition.
So his parents toured around, especially his mother. So he really didn't mix when he was really young. He didn't mix with kids his age at all. So he didn't even know how to connect with kids, which that right there sets a very bad foundation. And so when he was like 14, he dropped out of school because of the war. They kind of moved the school for safety reasons, and his mother didn't move him. She just had him drop out. Back then, people would just, you go to school till you're 14, 13, nobody cared. That was as far as his education went, but he did get into entertainment. So he started playing the ukulele, he started playing the drums. He was apparently an amazing drummer, like he's a really good drummer. Yeah. So he was doing some stage work, doing jokey ukulele songs and that kind of thing. He did join the RAF, and so he ended up in the entertainment, doing entertainment within the RAF. He wasn't doing comedy too much. There were comedians performing, but he was mostly playing drums. But he was watching other comedians, and then he would apparently do a lot of joking around where he would impersonate officers to the point where he really could have gone to jail for what he was doing. Yeah. He was a real, prankster to the point where it was like really quite dangerous, but he couldn't resist doing that. He was just mastering his impersonations. He just was obsessively doing that.
We had a real talent for that. And then at some point when he was going to show business early on, he had an act, and it consisted of impressions and drums.
Yeah.
An odd combination of things to do at once.
So his ambition was at first to break into radio, to do radio comedy. He kind of, again, pranked his way into it because he was rejected a bunch of times. But there was a famous producer who would hook up talent to the radio, to the radio personnel. And he actually called a radio station impersonating that guy and said, you got to check out this guy, Peter Sellers, who's been performing at some, little strip joint, whatever. And they were really impressed, because he sounded exactly like the guy. And that got him his first radio gig. And from there, he actually did quite well. People immediately, he was doing impressions and comedy on radio, and he immediately was getting some acclaim. And of course, eventually he hooked up with Spike Milligan. And I always forget the other person's name. It's just so terrible.
Harry Seacombe.
I apologize. Harry Seacombe. He's such a sweet, like wonderful. And I just never remember his name. And
he was lovely, Sir Harry Seacombe. He was fabulous. A wonderful guy. Was knighted later on. And at the beginning was also Michael Bentine was also a part of the Goon Show as well, who you characterized by his insane hair.
Right. So the Goon Show was what they came up with. They kind of described it as a cartoon come to audio life. It's like an audio version of a cartoon.
It seemed to me like it was parody of sort of what you'd find on like dramatized radio programs at the time. There were a lot of like mystery stories and adventure stories, but they were all done in this completely absurd and bizarre way. What made the Goon Show special, though, was not the premises for the stories so much as the fact that they created this grouping of characters that they would recur over and over again in these stories, so that Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers had created a sort of a cast of bizarre, weird characters that they played. And no matter what story they were doing, those same characters would show up and those same voices would show up. And that was what made it a thing that people had to tune into every single week when it was on. And then these familiar characters would come on, like Peter Sellers did a character called Blue Bottle, who was meant to be like a very annoying teenage boy, and he did a very old man named Henry. And Spike Milligan did a voice called Eccles, who was sort of like a goofy kind of idiot character. And people would applaud with recognition when they would bring out these voices every single time. But the story would always be different. It would be like Across the Andes on a goat, or, you know, The Mystery of the Lost Key, or something like that.
At the time, I was asleep in my electrified elephant hammock when through the pigeonhole flew a carrier pigeon. There was something strapped to his leg. It was the postman.
Letter for you, sir.
Thank you. Hurriedly, I tore open the letter. Inside was an envelope. With a message that said, "Report at once to MI5." The letter was written in a disguised voice. Hurriedly stepping on a fresh pigeon, I flew out the window. Come in. Captain Harry Seagoon reporting for duty as instructed, sir. I'm ready to die for the flag, bleed for my country, suffer great sufferings, and all for England! You twit.
And Spike Milligan wrote the bulk of these scripts. He was so prolific and worked himself so hard that he ended up literally in a straitjacket.
Wow.
In a rubber room. Like, he literally was institutionalized, and he had a nervous breakdown from it. He had an incredibly inventive mind and a real love of puns. And so there was no limitation on what could happen in one of these goon shows. Harry Seacombe, incidentally, would always be the protagonist in all of these stories and would not play other characters. He would only ever be himself. He would only ever do his one voice, and that would be himself. And that was funny as a kind of anchor for all of the craziness going on around them, and turning things on their head and doing things in audio that could not be visualized at all. And that nowhere is there better evidence of that than the many, many attempts to visualize the Goon Show, which never worked. They tried doing it with animation. They tried doing it with puppets, and it didn't work. It didn't make any sense. You couldn't see the Goon Show. It had to exist in your imagination while you listened to it.
There were a few TV versions.
Telegoons,
a show called Fred, right? Or
yeah.
There was a Idiots Weekly.
And there were a few films that tried to kind of replicate that as well.
Right. So they did some early films. That is interesting too, because right from the absolute get-go, Peter Sellers was doing multiple roles. So you realize, you think of like Kubrick or whatever, you think of The Mouse That Roared. You just, no matter how far back you go all the way back to the very first film that Peter Sellers ever did, and he was doing that then, and he never stopped.
I think the fact that he started in radio and had arguably, I think one of his most creative periods was during that time doing the Goon Show, informed the whole rest of his acting career. When he was creating a character, even crafting Chance for being there, he would always start with the voice. If he got the voice down, he would get the rest of the character. And I think that all came from the Goon Show.
Yeah, he would have a tape recorder and just record himself over and over and over.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's how he found the voice for Dr. Strangelove. So when he became popular as a comedian, he did a series of comedy albums, which are wonderful. If you can get hold of them, they're great. He had a lot of hit novelty records.
The Goon guys, they put out a couple of movies. The earliest one is Penny Points to Paradise.
He's got the spondulics. Spondulics? A dreadful disease. No, Major, the spondulics. In the fingers. Oh, the worst place you can have it.
If you don't leave soon, one of us is going to have an accident.
Then, in that case, I represent the Rigor Mortis Insurance Company. From the cradle to the grave, we make your accidents worthwhile. The more the agony, the more the money.
And then they did a little short called Let's Go Crazy. And again, he's just doing multiple roles. He even does a
Yeah.
Groucho Marx impersonation.
That's right. He does impersonate Groucho in there.
And
some of his Goon Show characters show up occasionally in live action in those movies.
so he got a few bit parts, but the first breakthrough role was The Lady Killers. That's an Alec Guinness movie where Alec Guinness is in disguise, himself. He has a sort of a whole look that's very heavily made up.
Yeah,
They're a
it's
gang of
interesting.
criminals. Yeah.
It's interesting that their careers overlapped only in 2 films. And weirdly, those 2 films were 20 years apart. They're both in Murder by Death also.
Oh, yeah.
Because Alec Guinness earlier had been known himself as the sort of master of disguise and master of voices. And he would put on, teeth and putty noses and play different voices and different characters.
So that's 55, just so you know. We haven't been talking about dates here. So again, a bunch of smaller parts and some television stuff, even some film shorts. But the next big one is The Mouse That Roared, in which he plays a woman. He plays a duchess, a grand duchess. He plays a prime minister.
3 different characters in that.
Yeah, 3 different characters. And that was a pretty big hit too. People enjoyed that.
Before Sellers really, broke in America but I guess he was well known at the time. I'm not sure what year this was, but did you know he did a cameo in a Bob Hope, Bing Crosby road movie?
No.
Yeah. He shows up in, I think it's Road to Hong Kong. He plays an Indian doctor, which was something he was known for doing.
He did Indian doctors, man. He did Indians. Yeah, he did a lot of Indians. He did a lot.
Yeah.
So again, this was when people would just play whatever ethnicity they wanted you to play.
Looking in here? My goodness gracious me. Would you look in the other ear, please? Well, I can see you. That's strange, I can see you.
That's only since I put in air conditioning.
He was known for being able to portray Asian characters, and he did a film with Sophia Loren, which was a romantic comedy called The Millionaires, where he played an Indian doctor. Based on that role, the great Indian director Satyavid Ray wanted to cast him in a film.
Wow.
Called The Alien, which never ended up getting made. Would have played an extraterrestrial, actually.
Wow. So another very big hit for him was a movie called I'm All Right, Jack, where he plays 2 roles. It's a black and white movie. There's no way we can talk about all the movies he did, but yeah, The Millionaires comes up, and that's with Sophia Loren. Now, so speaking about his personal life at this point, he had gotten married to a woman named Anne, and he had 2 kids, Michael and Sarah. So at this point, he's making money. He's actually very successful, and he is loving that and buying. He had a car obsession,
and he's lost a lot of weight by starving himself, basically.
He's becoming this sort of handsome leading man, and he's really making a lot of money. They bought this beautiful mansion in the country, and then
and he was, by this point, let's not mince words, buying his own bullshit.
Yeah. So,
I think there's no other way to put it.
Yeah. So
he was believing his own bullshit.
Now most likely, so I'm going to diagnose him, because I love psychology and diagnosing.
Okay.
But I think, he'd always been a narcissist, probably because of the way he was brought up. So I believe he was a true narcissist. He was known as a kid to throw tantrums. He was a nightmare kid. People who worked with them on the road were like, this kid was a terror. And his mother would never discipline him, etc. He was a spoiled brat who would throw fits and throw tantrums and get anything he wanted. And so he was that way on the set, apparently. And he was also that way with his own family. So when his kids did something that upset him, he would trash their toys. The saddest thing I have to report is that according to the biography, The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, he did abuse his wife. She had bruises all the time. So that's really upsetting.
I thought you were going to bring up the fact that while filming The Millionaires, he had deluded himself into believing that Sophia Loren, who was at the time married to Carlo Ponti, had fallen in love with him.
Who was married to Carlo Ponti her whole life. She had no intention of ever leaving. She loved Carlo Ponti.
Also she's Sophia Loren. That's a very significant fact about Sophia Loren, and I think it's the most significant fact. In fact, it's the first thing on her Wikipedia page. It says she is Sophia Loren.
Yeah,
and you almost don't need to read past that. But he probably, she was just being Italian, and he misinterpreted that because he was British. So he at some point came home and announced to his wife and children Sophia Loren is in love with me, and I'm going to be leaving you for her. Sophia Loren was not aware of this at all. This was news to her.
Yeah. I mean, I get the impression they did have a very friendly relationship. There's a little truth somewhere in between where I think they were very, very friendly and they would talk on the phone a lot and all of that stuff.
What's sure that her natural warmth was just intoxicating.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I've never met her, but I'm guessing.
What's interesting is, stalking is more common than you think. I mean, there's a lot of people who become romantically obsessed. And when it's really bad, it's called erotomania. That's the diagnosis. And people can get to the point where they're delusional and they really believe this person, this object of their affection, loves them back when they don't. And that seems to be what actually happened. And it's interesting that happened to a celebrity. You know what I mean? Like you hear about people doing that to celebrities, but Peter Sellers is an example of a celebrity who was a stalker, of another celebrity.
I heard,
it seems
I heard Courtney Love did that to a few people.
And it totally broke up his marriage. Of course, obviously, it broke up his marriage.
I think that was the point at which Anne had enough.
Yeah. She was like,
and realized that this is crazy. I gotta go.
Because he would just talk about his love for Sophia to his wife. Certainly he was abusing her, and he was regularly trashing their possessions. He was actually a dangerous character, I mean,
he was a toxic personality. He was a vampire. He was a person who would meet another person and drain them, just drain them. And his first wife, Anne, to her great credit, got the hell out of there and remarried and went on to have a very happy life.
Yeah.
But she still kept in touch with Peter because he then made her into this sort of like mommy figure. He would bring his girlfriends to meet her.
Yeah.
He wanted her to approve.
He was a hedonist, so he would go through women like tissue paper and, he would love bomb them. He would just make you feel like you're the most special person in the world. And then he'd get sick of you in 2 dates and you'd never see him again. And of course, he was very neglectful of his kids. So, all right.
Terribly neglectful. And his first two children who were traumatized were not even the worst traumatized children. I believe with Britt Eklund, he had a daughter, Victoria.
He had poured a drink over her head once. Anyway, it just, so this is, sorry to report all this. Okay, so let's just get back to the movies. Oh yeah, Road to Hong Kong was 1962. That was after a lot of this, actually.
Okay, so I guess he would have been well known in the United States at that point.
Indian neurologist, uncredited. All right, 1962, Lolita. That was Stanley Kubrick. That's one of my least favorite Kubrick movies, but certainly Peter Sellers is wonderful in it. He's amazing.
Listen, didn't you have a daughter? Didn't you have a daughter with a lovely name? Yeah, a lovely, what was it now? A lovely lyrical, lilting name like,
Lolita.
Lolita, that's right. Lolita, diminutive of Dolores, the tears and the roses.
Wednesday she's going to have a cavity filled by your Uncle Ivor.
Yes. Yes.
So Lolita was 62. 63 was the first Pink Panther. Most people don't consider that the best Pink Panther movie.
It's really, I mean, it's a David Niven movie, is what it is.
It was supposed to be. It's supposed to be a David Niven movie.
It's really about the diamond and the thief, and it's sort of he's this debonair thief, and the part of the detective is a very small part. It was originally Peter Ustinov was cast in that part.
And Peter Sellers, he almost didn't want to take it because he was like, I'm not taking sloppy seconds. Peter Ustinov decided not to do it. Why would I want to do that? But they convinced him and he stole the show. Everybody remembered Peter Sellers in that role. It's a really cute movie. I mean, it's adorable. You know what I mean? It's adorable. It's not brilliant, but it's really cute. I love, what's her name in it? Claudine, what's the wonderful Italian actress?
Claudia Cardinale?
Claudia Cardinale.
Okay.
I love
her. Well, I
know
right. her. Sure.
I actually am not attracted to Sophia Loren, but Claudia Cardinale, I think she's one of the most beautiful women who ever walked the earth. Now, 1964, the year after that was Dr. Strangelove. I have an episode on my Shining website, Shining 237 podcast website, where we discuss Dr. Strangelove. If anybody's interested in hearing me go on about that, we had a roundtable discussion. You weren't in that, were you? I don't think so.
No, I wasn't.
No. Sorry. So anyway,
what the hell?
You did 2001.
Yeah, but why didn't you invite me for that
one?
I know.
Jeez, I should have invited you. Yeah. But anyway, so I did a roundtable discussion on Dr. Strangelove.
Just leaving.
Y'all should look it up. All should look it up. And it's a really fun conversation that really gets into that.
There's not too much more we can say about Dr. Strangelove here.
It's, Yeah, it's wonderful.
Probably the pinnacle of Peter Sellers' acting career. If this isn't, then that is. He's just absolutely phenomenal in that film.
And one of the most important comedy films in history.
There was something about Kubrick that seemed to be able to control him and keep him on a leash, so to speak, and not have any tantrums on set or anything like that. It seems like he wouldn't have dared to pull anything like that on Kubrick.
Kubrick was, he was intimidating, I think. And
Kubrick was just
so
so steady. He was such a calm, cool customer. He was not impressed by celebrity. He wasn't the least bit intimidated to be making an epic with Kirk Douglas. So he certainly wasn't going to be intimidated by Peter Sellers.
Probably because also Kubrick was so technically professional. And you just felt that the care that was going into the filming, you know what I mean? Like you couldn't help not feeling that. And then he was playing with George C. Scott and
Sterling Hayden.
I mean, so that in itself also, these amazing American actors. I mean, he in Lolita was with Jackie Mason, so he's still kind of with the European star. But that was, I think Strangelove was the first time he was really doing American audience, right?
Wait a minute, Jackie Mason.
Oh my God, James Mason.
She's a 14-year-old girl, but I'm in love with her. But I don't love her mother. But I'm married to her mother. But I don't love her. But she's a sexy young girl. But I don't think she's a good person. And I'm not saying that because I'm a bad person. But I don't like her. But I love her. But I want to. But I'm sex with her. But I don't want to have sex with her mother. But I'm married to Shelley Winters, and she's a terrible person. And
now that would have worked. That would have worked better.
There you go.
And I love James Mason. But Jackie Mason, it would have been because I don't like that movie. That would have made sense.
It would have been an improvement for you, Jackie Mason.
All right,
Lolita. What if James Mason was playing Kutchers in the Catskills?
Okay, so and then they did A Shot in the Dark, which was the second Clouseau movie.
Well, because that was where it was. Clouseau was the center of the movie, where he was,
so that
was about him.
That was where they made it like the Clouseau with Cato, which is really the best part. Let's face it, is the Cato scenes, right? I mean,
that's really the first. I mean, that's the first real Pink Panther movie as we know it.
Yeah. So with Cato, with the commissioner, with these standard characters, of course, Pink Panther was Blake Edwards. And Blake Edwards had done Breakfast at Tiffany's. He was already a big shot. Of course, he loved Peter Sellers, but filming A Shot in the Dark was not a fun experience for anybody. And they swore they would never work together again.
I think Sellers had a particular dislike of Blake Edwards.
In the HBO biopic, they showed Peter Sellers at one of the premieres of one of the 70s, I guess it's the Revenge of the Pink Panther. He just, in front of a whole audience, just completely trashes the movie and trashes Blake Edwards.
And yet, working with Kubrick and working with Hal Ashby had a wonderful experience working with Peter Sellers on this movie. He said Peter Sellers was fantastic on the movie. He was easy to work with, and he was professional, and he obviously on screen, he's brilliant. And Kubrick always had a good experience working with him. Kubrick and Ashby saw him as something more than a clown. And I think that's the difference. And I think that's why he respected those guys and he didn't respect Blake Edwards.
The whole career of Peter Sellers, really, most of his movies were pretty bad.
Most of them were terrible.
And he was just working. He was just working. He was working with what was given him, including a Woody Allen script, including like some really great script writers, right? But it was garbage. Now, the kind of comedy that was coming out at that time was pretty flimsy stuff.
But he had a reputation for sabotaging movies from the set.
Yeah.
Like in the documentary The Ghost of Peter Sellers, about a movie that never got made because the director was sabotaged on the set by Peter Sellers, who was incredibly uncooperative and wouldn't show up and would leave, and basically just the whole movie fell apart while it was filming. And it wasn't the only time he did that, where movies never got made or never got released because he was such a nightmare on the set, And of course, he was in Casino Royale that was filmed, the comedy farce version of it, which was made in 1967, where he did everything in his power to sabotage that. And didn't get along with anyone on the set, has a scene with Orson Welles where they couldn't be on the set at the same time. And he didn't get along with Woody Allen or anybody involved with that film at all. Even Joe McGrath, who was the director, who he had known for years, he wasn't getting along with at that point. And I think it was because he felt that, well, he shouldn't be playing James Bond in a comedy. He thought, look at me, I'm slender, I'm I'm handsome. I should be playing James Bond for real.
Let's also, point out that going backwards in time, the people who made it to the top as far as being directors and writers of movies and famous actors, were often the thing that got you to the top was being a jerk, was being a narcissist, lying your way to the top, sleeping your way to the top, whatever it is you had to do. Again, we're coming around this corner in the 21st century where we're kind of deciding to be more ethical about how we elevate people. And so you had this combination of just people doing a lot of coke. The 60s and 70s especially were just the time of excess. Film stars, rock stars, directors, writers, they were just living like absolute total fucking hedonists and, just steamrolling anybody in their way. And so you had these clusters of people all working on these films who were all just jerks, that's what it was. And so, I think that's part of it too.
Some of these films, well, let's going back to Casino Royale, if there was ever a film that probably should have been sabotaged from within, it was that one. So maybe Peter Sellers was the hero of that.
Yes.
The only way in which he failed was that it got made.
Right, exactly. All right. So What's New Pussycat? Oh my gosh, that movie. These movies are kind of fun to watch because of the costumes. It's like these great 60s outfits and the sets. They're fun time capsules, but that's about it, right? These are really stupid movies. That was Woody Allen's first writing experience. I believe he was very unhappy with that movie. He's all over it. That was a clashing of everybody. It was supposed to be a Warren Beatty vehicle. Yeah,
him and Sellers hated each other. Woody Allen and Sellers hated each other.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be a Warren Beatty vehicle. He backed out of it because he didn't have enough of him. His role was diminishing. Woody Allen kept expanding his role because he wanted to be famous. Everybody was vying for more screen time and more lines, and it ended up being.
I'm sure Peter O'Toole was a charmer. He was probably the only nice guy on the whole set of that one.
Woody, Peter Sellers looks like, I don't know what they were thinking with the wig he's wearing. I don't understand this character at all. The character doesn't make sense. He's supposed to be some 70s hippie version of Freud, and it's just I never really
dug that movie. There's a story in the biography of Sellers that he wanted Woody Allen to be fired from the movie, and at some point he's standing in the lobby of the hotel, I think it was the Dorchester Hotel where he's staying, and reading a magazine at the newsstand. Somebody from Woody Allen's management company who walks up to him thinking he's Woody Allen. And because he had a big nose and he wore glasses, and he was very slender,
except for the color of the hair. Yeah.
So this guy walks up to Sellers thinking he's Woody Allen, and he just says to him, "Psst, Woody, listen, don't worry about this Peter Sellers guy. We're gonna get him kicked off the movie. It's not gonna be a problem." And Peter Sellers turns to the guy and says, "Great, that's fabulous news. I'm thrilled to hear it." And I don't know. That's how the story goes. I don't know that that's true, but what a great story it would be if it was true. Yeah.
We can only hope. Yeah, that's wonderful. Groucho Marx was supposed to be the Peter Sellers role, by the way. They originally wanted Groucho Marx. Yeah,
wow,
yeah. Groucho has to come into every one of our episodes somehow.
Well, I'm glad Groucho didn't do that because it freed him up to do Skidoo.
And then the other thing about that movie is What's New Pussycat, one of the greatest songs in the history of music, especially if you're
the song out of it,
especially if you're a kid. And My Little Red Book is also tucked into that movie. It's a great song. So again, you get these wonderful cartoon openings, you get these fabulous costumes, wonderful production design, and music to die for, and crappy comedy. But it's kind of it might be worth your time. After that, we have The Wrong Box, which we talked about. That's got Mr. Cook and Mr. Moore in there with Mr. Caine, Michael Caine, and Peter Sellers in a small role. After The Fox is when he married Britt Eklund, and did a movie with her. That whole marriage went down in flames as much as any of his others.
Good gravy, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's worth getting into that.
Britt Eklund, to her credit, got the hell out of there because she realized this guy's fucking nuts.
Then Casino Royale. Now, again, we talked about that, but that for the production design, it's really fun production design. It's a terrible movie, but it's so fun. It's so much color and crazy set pieces that it's almost worth your while. So I would say,
I mean, it's an artifact of the 60s. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. He did get back together with Blake Edwards in '68 for The Party, which is a really odd movie. It's kind of a storyless movie. It's kind of he plays an Indian person wandering through a party and kind of culture clashing. And it's an odd little bit.
Well, I always kind of liked it because it was like a Jacques Tati film. It was like this guy who just everywhere he goes, things break and he causes trouble and he can't control it. And he's this odd man out, this character. And in the end, nothing really bad happens and everybody dances and it's a party. And it's like Tati's films all end that way. Everybody's really happy at the end anyway. It's no big deal.
My daddy left. They took the gold watch that your father left you? I'm sorry, it's absolutely fantastic. What a wonderful thing I wanted to do. Take everything, including the father's watch. It's wonderful, wonderful. I tell you, tonight is one big round of laughter. All fun and laughter.
The congressman was just telling us about the time he was robbed.
And that character, they say, influenced Rowan Atkinson's Mr. Bean. He had picked up a little bit from that. They say Hank Azaria kind of picked up, for his Apu in The Simpsons. It was a little bit influenced.
Not something to advertise. Not something you want to wave a flag about.
I love Apu.
Everybody loves Apu.
I know.
Everybody loves Apu, but Apu should stay in the 90s where he belongs.
Actually,
he should stay in the 60s where he belonged to begin with. Should have never been in the 90s.
One of my favorite Simpson moments of all time. Streetcar, one of the greatest episodes.
Yes.
At Apu's little singing solo where he plays the newspaper man. I think that is a piece of television, a diamond. Sellers was also known for I Love You, Alice B. Toklas. Now, The Magic Christian, I've always wanted to see that. Have you seen
you've got to see The Magic Christian.
Really?
Yes,
Okay.
You've got to see The Magic Christian.
I keep meaning to. That's one of the ones that's on
also
my
read the book by Terry Southern, which is a very different book. It takes place in America. It's not a British story at all. It was transposed to be a British story when the film was made, starring Peter Sellers and Ringo Starr, and with a cameo appearance by Christopher Lee, I believe.
Of course,
portraying Dracula.
All right, I need to read it too. Yeah, you're right, because that's on my list. All right, so now you ended up watching A Day at the Beach. I know that's an unreleased. There's a lot of unreleased Sellers. So this is where we are now talking about the part of his career where it starts
things
tanking.
Start to fall apart really badly.
Things are tanking, and you're getting to some unreleased films that were never even released because they were so unformed and bad.
I did see recently saw the movie A Day at the Beach, and boy, that is one depressing ass film. That is one of the most downer movies I've ever seen in my life.
Roman Polanski was one of the writers. That's why I have it in my head. I've always been curious to see it. Jack McGowan is in it, who I love.
It's a movie that makes Leaving Las Vegas look like the feel-good hit of the summer. Peter Sellers plays a flamboyantly gay shop owner, along with Graham Stark, who was a frequent co-star of his, playing his co-owner of the shop, who's also flamboyantly gay. And the two of them are doing these over-the-top mincing queen impersonations that are, even at the time, were probably outdated. He's terrible in that film in his one scene.
Pippi, why don't you go and see how many bottles we've got in our private collection? While I try and keep this young man happy.
Around the same time, he had done a film called The Blockhouse, which I have also seen, and it's a very, very hard film to find. It's a war movie about these men that are trapped underground in what's called the blockhouse for, I believe, a period of years. And it's a super serious film, and it's really good, actually. And Sellers is very, very good in it.
I'd love to see that.
I think you can find it online, probably. I don't know. It's been a while since I saw it, but
so that was unreleased, though. It was unreleased.
Yeah, it ultimately was unreleased. It's out there somewhere, but
all right. There's a Girl in My Soup with Goldie Hawn, and he did Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. We had talked about that on the Bedazzled episode. And then but this is all just like Ghostland for him. He's doing commercials at this point because he's really having a hard time making money. And
he's doing a lot of commercials.
Yeah.
Some of which are a lot of fun to watch.
To help you get more vacations for your money, Transworld Airlines brings you Transworld Vacation. Let's go, MacDougall. Hey, when I'm in Europe, I'm happy. Right now I'm flying TWA over Pittsburgh, and I'm still happy. and the romantic of foreign films. Just like a euro. Scusi. What's so good about these new commercials? They give me a chance to develop a new personality, a new character for each one, instead of being myself. God knows who that is anyways.
What comes next, of course, that saves his life, basically.
Basically, yeah, crawling back to Blake Edwards.
Yeah.
And they do Return of the Pink Panther.
1975, Return of the Pink Panther. And it was a huge hit. He did Murder by Death the next year. And of course, the best one, I think, The Pink Panther Strikes Again. Wouldn't you say that's the best?
I suppose so. Yeah. I mean, I like Return of the Pink Panther as well. I think it's actually pretty fun.
They're great.
They're all very erratic films, you know. They all have, but some of the set pieces in Return of the Pink Panther are some of my favorites. I mean, when the guy knocks on his door and just hands him a bomb and says, "Your bomb, sir," that's just still is incredibly funny to me.
No, it is. They're much better. They really are much better than the junk he was doing before that. Those two movies in particular are pretty good.
Yeah.
There's some great lines and some amazing physical comedy. Just like they up the ante with the physical comedy, and it's much more elegant and, you know, like really eye candy kind of stuff. So we forgot to mention, you know, around the time of After the Fox and his marriage to Britt Eklund, that's when he had the heart attack where he died. He actually died.
Right.
And they had a really hard time reviving him. But you know, so he survived, but he had several heart attacks over this period, and he ended up with a pacemaker. You know, some say he kind of knew his time was very limited because his heart was so bad. He did coke and stuff like that. I don't know if he had congenital heart problems. Both of his parents died of a heart attack. So he, you know, but they say he kind of knew, and that he, you know, so that makes being there a lot more poignant, you know, in its own way also. So he did Prisoner of Zenda, which is supposed to be awful. Do you know anything about that?
No, I've never seen it. I've heard it was awful.
Yeah,
So there.
supposed to be awful.
That's why I've never seen it.
Multiple roles. And then Being There, and then his final film, The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
Yep.
Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. I've got a little cat and I'm very fond of that, but I'd rather have a bow wow wow.
So and so he died in 1980 at the age of 54. And of course, as we are implying, his heart just gave out. That was it. He died of a heart attack. And he was buried, or we'll get to that. We'll get to what it says on his tombstone at the end when we talk about the end of this movie.
Oh, okay. So some suspense being built up there.
All right. So let's get back to the movie.
Well, I want to mention something about Being There, which I found sort of interesting, which is another sort of Dr. Strangelove connection, other than Peter Sellers being in it, which is we are shown that the president of the United States is sexually impotent.
Is it me? Is it something I've done?
No, sweetheart, it's not. No, it's not you.
That's not in the book at all. And they really hammer that several times. I thought that was interesting.
And first it seems like, well, he's, you know, is the first lady wants to be intimate with him, but he's so preoccupied with this mystery of who the hell is this Chauncey Gardner guy. And then later on, we're in bed and the president is just kind of apologizing to his wife and saying, "I'm sorry, I just can't." And I do think that's interesting that the president it seems like he's rendered impotent by the appearance of Chauncey Gardner in public life, in the world. But the whole idea of the people in power being sexually impotent is it's the entire theme of Dr. Strangelove.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's about
confluence of political and military power with sex.
And the male perspective.
As a substitute for male virility or masculine virility.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Worden, again, I think plays a comedic role. He's playing it in a comedic way.
Yeah, it was definitely a point because they hit it like 3 or 4 times, and you're like, why do they keep doing that? And you realize, they're trying to tell us something here. Yeah.
Is this movie the only film to have both Richard's Dysart and Basehart in it?
Probably.
It may be.
You're not going to hear that connection in any other podcast except.
No. Do you have any thoughts on the supporting cast? I wanted to say that I I like David Clennon very much, who plays Thomas Franklin, the sleazy attorney.
Where have I seen him? I didn't really look him up. He's so familiar.
Well, I'll tell you where you've seen him before. I'll trigger it for you with one of his great lines of dialogue. You gotta be fucking kidding me.
Sounds familiar, and I can picture him saying that.
The Thing.
Oh, is he in The Thing? Oh,
That's
that's
him.
wonderful. Wow.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I didn't make that connection at all.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then his head splits open later because he's the Thing.
Oh, that's so
But-
great. Yeah, but that's a perfect movie. I'm disappointed in myself for not remembering him in that.
Yeah. And then he was on the TV show 30 something, where he was this evil,
Oh yeah.
the evil boss of the advertising agency.
Yeah, that makes sense because I
Remember
remember
that
watching
show?
that. I
Long
remember
time
I
ago,
used to
back in
watch
the
it. I used to
90s,
watch it. I
people
used to watch
watched
it.
that.
Yeah,
it was
I watched it. Yep.
it was a huge popular
Yep,
show that
it was
nobody remembers now anymore.
Huge cultural institution at the time.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it really was. I'll never forget when that guy died in the, it had one of the greatest
The one
surprise deaths.
character was the one character had a whole season of dying of cancer, and then on the episode where she was supposed to die, the other character dies in a bike accident.
Motorcycle accident. And I remember I missed that episode. I watched it every single week.
That was
and
the Sopranos ending of its time. People were divided.
I happened to not watch it that week. And I remember being crushed that I missed it.
It was
crushed.
divisive. That was the Sopranos ending of its
Yeah.
time. People were like either on board or angry and smashing their TV sets.
So not as genius as the Sopranos ending, which was
I'm just
genius.
saying it was, well, I think I'm on board.
All right, Louise. So I want to get back to Louise. So at this point in the movie, we see Louise at wherever she is, and she's in a like sort of what looks like a boarding house, and she's watching what's going on with this gardener with Chance, and she's
It's on
saying,
like a Tonight Show thing.
she's saying, this could only happen to a white person. This could only happen to a white person.
Sounds as if we need a lot of gardening here.
We certainly do. Yes.
It's for sure a white man's world in America. I raised that boy since he was the size of a piston. Had no brains at all. Yes, sir. All you gotta be is white in America to get whatever you want.
And she had affection for him,
Right.
but she's just
But she's
like,
still-
what the hell? What the
Rice
hell?
pudding between his ears.
Yeah, because she knows he's not
Dumb
smart.
as a jackass.
That feeling, when you are so much smarter than that person, and you're watching this happen. And I just think that's, and again, that's not in the book. And I think that's a really wonderful layer that they added to this
I
movie.
think so. I think it's an important layer because
Yeah.
so much of this movie is about the reality of this country and about who really is in charge of this country. You can't leave race out of that.
And let me just submit that it's not just this country, it's the world. I mean, this is how it works. It's a worldwide thing. It's sort of how things always work. It's human beings, it's humanity. You know what I mean?
True.
It's really humanity.
Yeah.
All right, so listen, let's talk about Eve and what I think is the weakest part of the movie, sadly. First of
Is
all,
the sort of kind of romance angle.
I'm not crazy about her performance, Shirley MacLaine's performance.
I think she's good in this. I think she's very good in The Apartment. I think she's been very good in a lot of things.
I'm one of the only people on the planet who hates The Apartment. I hate The Apartment. I don't know
But anyway,
why.
It's great.
I know. It's one of those weird things. But
make any
anyway,
sense.
I like Shirley MacLaine. I'm not bashing Shirley MacLaine,
But
but I hate the way it's written. I hate this part. So they have her have a big crush on him. And, Ben's kind of pushing her towards him and saying, well, I'll feel secure if she ends up with this guy. I know I'm about to die. I like Chauncey, so I would love to see her end up with him. But she does have a crush on him. They keep saying how handsome he is and everything.
He looks very good. Peter Sellers apparently got plastic surgery before this was filmed in order to play the role.
I saw something about that.
Yeah,
What did he
because
get?
if you watch him in like the third or the last Pink Panther film from like a couple of years, or from like 77 or 78, he doesn't look good. He's got like sort of hanging turkey neck going on there, and none of that is in this film at all.
Yeah.
He apparently gained weight to play the role, but he did have a facelift, so they got took care of him. So he has this very strong chin line and very strong jawline in the film, and he's very handsome.
But so the worst scenes in this movie are her trying to seduce him. And so, she's
I found I couldn't get through the masturbation scene last time I watched it. It was just it was so cringeworthy. I just wanted to turn it off.
It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah,
So, but
yeah.
you know, there's two scenes. So one, she's just kissing him, and the kissing is just like, oh my God, like it's not him, it's her. It's the most unromantic.
Well, no, he grabs her and kisses her because he's
No.
imitating what he
That was
watches on the TV.
That's the second scene.
Oh, okay.
The
That's
first
second
scene, she
kiss.
comes in where he has that tray on his lap, and that's when
Right.
she makes clear to him
Kisses
that
him.
she's interested, and she's just like
He has no
smooching
reaction
his
to it,
face
yeah.
like it's a basketball. I don't know. It's really strange.
You're special to me. There's only one in this wonderful world.
Again, she projects onto him like, oh, thank you for not encouraging me because I would have
Right.
just gone crazy. I would have opened up.
Right. I'm so
And
glad that you didn't give in. Yeah, you know.
And
'cause
he
I-
says to her, I'm glad you didn't open up, Eve,
Yeah.
because he has no idea what that would
He just
entail, and
repeats.
it sounds horrifying when you think about it. So let's not have any of that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm with him on that one. I'm glad you didn't open up too, Eve.
So and while that's happening, they have Mr. Rogers playing, which makes it even more uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Because you're just like, you think of him as a child because they're playing Mr.
Right.
Rogers.
It's this
and-
childish
Uh,
music.
So then this next scene, he's watching kissing on TV. And so she walks in and he tries to kiss her like he's
Right. He's just imitating what's on the TV.
Yeah.
What's interesting is what the kissing he's watching is from the movie The Thomas Crown Affair,
Mhm.
which I think was another one that Hal Ashby edited.
So he says to her, I just like to watch. And he's really talking about the TV, right?
Yeah.
And so she thinks he's saying, I just like to
I
watch,
want to watch
you do something sexual. And so she gets on a actual like lion skin rug or tiger skin rug. I don't know.
Like a
and
bear.
starts,
It's like a
or
head,
bear. Yeah,
you
it must
know.
be a bear. It's probably a bear. And she starts, you know, pleasing herself. And it's just like, oh, the whole scene is just like,
They offered the part of Ben Rand to Burnt Lancaster, and he turned it down. And I think it was because he didn't want to be in a
Yeah.
movie where Shirley MacLaine masturbates. Yeah, the thing is, watching that now, it's it's an eye roller of great magnitude. And 1979, that would have been a thing. People came home and said, "Oh, you got to see this movie because there's a scene where she masturbates."
it's so not
That
sexy.
was a thing
though.
in 1979. People would have like said, "Oh yeah, that's the thing they would have retained from the movie."
Well, I just want to say that I think another actress could have did a different version of that would have worked and would have been kind of poignant. I think there's a way to do it with the skill of what Melvin Douglas was doing in that role, where it could have come out kind of sexy and poignant and not just disturbing and gross. I don't know. I just think there's a way to interpret that scene. And I don't think Shirley MacLaine had it in her. And again, I'm not bashing
Yeah.
her. I just don't think that was.
But it doesn't flatter her
It was
character
tough.
at all.
Yeah, I mean, I feel sorry for her because her husband's dying, you know, and
Right,
and you know,
right.
again, you get the feeling she really loves her husband. You know, you don't. It doesn't feel real. There's nothing about it that feels real.
No,
and you know, like somebody needed to sort of take those scenes, kind of turn it over in their head and say, let's do it this way. And you know, I know there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it. There's always a way. There's always a way. But that's the only part I don't like in the whole movie.
I agree with you on that, and I think that is one of the weaker parts of the movie. Although I do think Shirley MacLaine is quite good in it. The question I wanted to ask you is, do you think Chance has some sort of real love for her?
I think he has, yeah, real affection for her, but I don't think he has the ability to have sexual love.
No,
You know what
I don't
mean?
think so. I don't
Yeah.
think romantic love is within him, but I think he can have a kind of affection for a human being beyond simply that she brings him his lunch.
Oh, definitely.
I ask is because that was originally meant to be the ending of the film. The original ending that was filmed was simply him and Eve going off together. There's the funeral at the end, and Chance wanders off and cares for a little tree by the lake. And then Shirley MacLaine finds him and says, "Chance, I've been looking everywhere for you." And then he says, "I've been looking everywhere for you, Eve." And then the two of them embrace and just walk off together. And that was filmed as the original ending of the film, interestingly. And I don't know why, because it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Peter's performance seems off in that. Chance seems a little bit too actively interested in Eve at that point. I don't know if it was meant to convey that Chance has changed in some way and that now he's able through Eve to be more like a normal person. I don't see that as making sense either for the character, but thankfully, to Hal Ashby's credit, he had this other idea for a different ending, which was what ended up in the movie. So thank goodness.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to talk a little bit about that when we get there too, about how the book ends. So Chauncey and Eve go off to a fair, a big Washington party. And again, he just impresses these Russians who, again, project onto him that he actually speaks Russian, and
Right.
you know,
He
all
says,
this stuff.
he says
It's so
nothing.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah. You know your Krylov in Russian.
So, you know, there's a little gay scene where this man hits on him. A gay man hits on him.
We could go upstairs right now.
Is there a TV upstairs? I like to watch.
You like to, watch?
And it's just very brief in the movie, but in the book, they actually go up to the bedroom.
Oh, that's interesting.
And the man who he meets gets off on Chauncey's shoe. He just he gets a like he you know this shoe, you know, it's his foot. And so they have it's a whole sex scene. And you know, of course, Chauncey's just totally confused. But I thought that was sort of interesting. That's actually where the book ends. So the book ends with them at this party, and during the party, people are discussing who should be bumped up, who should be running for vice president. While he's at the party and all these experiences are happening, there's a cabal of people talking about, which is what you see in the funeral, where the pallbearers are discussing what to do with, you know, they're discussing that
And we don't know who the pallbearers are. We just know these are the 6 men who run the world.
Right, exactly.
These are the 6 guys who sit around a smoky oak table and decide for you and I what's going to happen.
Yeah, as they're in front of the pyramid with the eye on it.
Yeah, and those are the guys who George Carlin says they own you.
Yeah. So in the book, you just have them discussing this, and you go back. The very last scene of the book is just Chauncey at this party, kind of on a balcony looking out, or something like that. You know, it sort of ends just on a wistful note where Chauncey's just like, oh, you know, and he's like blank brained, and he's just going, look at this beautiful city, or something like that. I'm kind of forgetting, but it just ends on a note of just like Chauncey at the party. You know, just what's going on in his mind is not much. While at the same, in the meantime, somewhere else, this cabal of people are talking about, you know that it's going to lead to like him being president.
It really
of the
does
United
end
States.
on a similar note as the film, really.
So let me just insert one more, what I think is a really nice scene. And this is, again, like Hal Ashby, I think, touch, I'm guessing, you know. But when Ben is dictating into this machine, he's talking into a microphone.
A dictaphone.
A dictaphone, and it's recording his. And you hear a clickety click as it's recording, and he's talking about what to do with his money. And the doctor comes and is like, you know, I really want to talk to you about this Chauncey guy.
Right. At that point, he's found out a little bit. He's you know, he knows that this guy is just a gardener. You know.
Yeah, and it's kind of. I just think it's a very beautiful scene, and it's very dark.
Yeah.
And so the doctor comes and says, I want to talk to you about Chauncey. And he says, you know what? I am able to die peacefully because of that guy. Yeah. I'm so happy that I met him right before I was about to die, because man, I feel good about dying now that I know he's here. And so then the doctor's like, okay.
He holds back on exposing Chance. And then when Ben does die, Chance is standing right next to his bed with the doctor. And the doctor looks into Chance's face and sees the genuine sadness.
And it's just beautiful. And then I think this finale, which is Ben's funeral, is really an amazingly genius scene.
Superb film.
Yeah. So what happens, the president comes to give the eulogy, and what he does is he decides to recite lines that Ben had said in his own lifetime. He's sort of like quoting Ben over and over.
Right. Yeah.
And so you see Eve and Chauncey in the funeral standing there looking very sad. And you hear the president, he's speaking into a very echoey microphone. And it's never quite completely in the foreground. It's always the sound of his voice is a little bit in the background. It's so beautifully done.
I do not regret having political differences with men that I respect. I do regret, however, that our philosophies kept us apart.
And you see the pallbearers bringing him up to this pyramid. And on the pyramid, it says, life is a state of mind. And just so you know, that's what's on Peter Sellers' tombstone. Life is a state of mind.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
it's on the gravestone because it was one of Ben Rand's quotes, and it ends up being the last line that the
It's
president
the last
says
line
in
that he
the
says, yeah.
film, just before it fades to
Right.
black. Yeah,
Right.
it's really
So,
something. And it was the tagline for the movie when the movie was marketed. When
oh,
the
was
film
it?
was
Yeah.
released, that was the tagline.
So you see them, the pallbearers are walking up the steps and discussing what to do, and they're kind of coming to the conclusion that they need to promote Chauncey Gardner because he has no background. He's the perfect leader because he has, no
Right.
background.
There's no dirt on him.
There's no dirt
nothing,
on
yeah.
him and all that stuff. So Chauncey walks away from Eve and walks into the woods and walks to the pond. But as all of this is happening, you just hear them reciting lines that Ben had said in his lifetime, and they're much more incriminating. So one of the first things he says is, "I have no use for those on welfare, but they have no use for me either." Something like that. That's the first line. And I was really kind of shocked at that because they had made him into such a sympathetic character. But here's where they kind of unravel.
But he also admits that, I mean, I like that statement. At least it's not disingenuous.
I liked this one. It says, "When I was a boy, I was told the Lord fashioned us in his own image. That's when I decided to manufacture mirrors." I thought that was really cool.
I didn't catch that one.
Yeah. So you just hear these lines, and there's something so haunting about it. It's so haunting. It's really beautiful. And you see Chauncey comes to the edge of the pond. He sees a little tree that's kind of it's like Charlie Brown's Christmas tree.
Yeah.
And he kind of props it up and fixes it up. And then he goes walking on the water.
Security, tranquility, a well-deserved rest.
And it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting ending. It's a beautiful ending. What do you think? I mean, what do you think?
What do you think?
It's obvious that this is a comparison to Christ, right? I mean, you can't get away from walking on water.
No, you can't. There's no way to avoid that, right? It's
so,
that, yeah.
As an ex-Catholic who has a lot of sympathy for, spiritual analogy, I think it's really beautiful. I do. I think it's really beautiful. And I do think that the good that comes out of not the religions of Christianity, but the person who is Jesus, I think there was a lot of, I think whatever stuff that came out of his mouth was I think he was an amazing philosopher and a groundbreaking thinker. And it was very simple stuff. The Buddha and Jesus are both their messages are simple. And, they're comparing him to that kind of message, spiritual message. And I think it's lovely. Again, I grew up Catholic, so I have a little bit of romanticism for that. So that's sort of me. But you did not grow up religiously. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I was put through Catholic instruction, and they tried to make me a Catholic. It didn't take, of course. Why would it? But, I mean, obviously it always seemed to me like the point of it, if there is a point of it, is that this man is so pure of heart that he literally floats on air.
Mm-hmm.
He has no ego. He has no ambition. It's almost Buddhist in a way. He is unburdened by the weight of all of what weighs us down intellectually and all of the 7 deadly sins that come with it. If you want to get religious about it, he's not lustful. He's not greedy. He is not vain. He is none of those things. He's unburdened by that. And so he is pure of soul and virtually weightless. The movie makes it a point to tell you that he really is walking on the water, because at some point he stops and notices that he's walking on the surface of the water and tests it with his umbrella. So the movie wants you to know he's really doing this. But it's such a beautiful picture, it just creates such a wonderful, beautiful image. I don't know that it necessarily has to have a concrete meaning. You could say, oh yes, he's so pure that he's Christ-like in a way, but then at the exact same moment, simultaneously, the most nefarious evil is taking place with him at the center of it, with these 6 pallbearers deciding that they are going to, it seems like, that install him as the president of the United States, where he will then be a patsy for whatever evil policies they want to put forth, assuming they're evil, who knows, or assuming the whole idea of the president being a puppet of these industrial forces is itself evil,
Yeah.
which it is.
Yeah, and the
Isn't
other
it?
movie,
You know?
and I mentioned those other movies at the beginning, like Forrest Gump, The Jerk, and the idea of Candide, Michael Rimmer. But it actually also, you can think of Damien, The Omen. You can think
Well,
of it as,
yeah,
there is
I
that
mean,
sort of
that's it.
feeling of like where you're
Oh, sure.
placing
It
evil
definitely
character.
has that in common with
Yeah.
The Omen, where by the third Omen, Sam Neill was the grown-up Damien, and he does get elected president of the United States.
Yeah.
The image you're seeing is of Chance walking on water like Christ, but on some level, is he a villain, really, by simply being this easily manipulated idiot who is poised to be manipulated by powerful forces? Does he then become as toxic and destructive a force as the most evil monsters throughout history?
Or does he save the
know?
world? Does he
Or
save the world?
Does he
Right.
save the world through his purity?
Right.
The idea that these 6 guys are going to install him as the president and then manipulate him into doing their bidding, it might be a fool's errand for them, because does anyone manipulate Chance at any point in the film?
No.
He manipulates them.
Right, exactly.
So it's possible that there's a happy ending here.
Yeah. No, that's why I
But
think the
none
Christ
of these 6 assholes
Yeah.
can do anything with Chance.
That's why I think the Christ analogy kind of holds, and I mean, only again, if you hold it at, it's not as the religion, because I think religion is destructive, but as a person who has a pure philosophy. Now, I think the other thing that you've pointed to is that this is a fable. And I think that that's the thing too, is there is no ending. There can't be an ending, because what's going to really happen? They're going to realize, it's impossible for him to become president. I don't know. And maybe we've disproven this by now, that it's impossible for someone like him to really be president.
It's impossible for someone like him to exist. It's impossible for anything in this movie to happen.
Yeah. So I think that that's what they were. I think that's another reason to have that ending, is to put a cap on the movie of like, this is pure fantasy, like to put in a pure fantasy element, so that you have to disengage from the movie and you can't go any further. That's the ending of the movie. There is nothing beyond this point. This is the ending, like a fable. So I think that makes sense, that's why they did it. Well, that's being there. Now I have a final catchphrase that I end the show with.
Oh dear.
And it's the worst part of the show. Comedy is tragedy plus the line, "He's standing right behind me, isn't he?"
That inbred, antiquated old cow. The only way she could stop me is if she sat on me with her big, fat, royal bottom. She's behind me, isn't she?
He's right behind me, isn't he?
He's right behind me, isn't he?
He's right behind me, isn't he?
He's behind me, isn't he?
She's behind me, isn't she?
I gotta tell you, I never not find that funny. I always, in other words, I always find that line funny. I think it is one of the funniest lines in comedy. I know it's been done a million times, but it always makes me laugh.
It's a popular trope.
I think it's funny.
Classic. It's classic. and if you can do it well, my God,
go for it. Just do it.
Yep, absolutely. By all means, do it
All
well.
right.
I hate it when people do it badly. Someone who does it badly is behind me, aren't they?
All right, go watch the Pink Panther 75, 76 movies. Go do that right now, and we'll see you next time. Hey, this is just a reminder to please like and subscribe. We've ended our Patreon, so from here on in, we're going to just put all of our videos right here on YouTube. We are generally demonetized by YouTube because we use so many clips. So if you'd like to tip us or donate and support our work, we'd really be so grateful. If you go to our main YouTube page, the banner at the top there in the right-hand corner, there is a donate button. Thank you so much.